Welcome to the new episode of Hands-On Business Podcast. Obviously, you joined us on a regular basis to listen to the great and the good of the business world, talking to us about tips and tricks of how to develop business. Today, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by Ian Jolly, who's the MD of Wheelwash, which is a small medium enterprise in the UK. It's got about 20% international business. Queen's Award winner in 2016 for international trade, exporter of the year for Cheshire. And Ian is a qualified accountant by profession and now working in manufacturing of heavy machinery. I'm sure we're going to get into that and find out how that journey evolved. Ian enjoys the gym. A lot goes about 3 times a week, and obviously in the current climate, that's very, very good, not just for fitness, but also mental health. And it's quite handy that Ian likes that because he also loves everything about food. So that 3 times a week is going to help him. He's also a regular speaker for the D.I.T at exporting events. And even though Ian worked for Wheelwash, as I said, an SME, he sold to some of the world's largest companies, such as Glencore Mining in Chile, Tata Steel, who everyone knows, and then ThyssenKrupp, I think is how you pronounce it. It's a massive energy company, an energy plant, in Brazil. And lastly, Ian was the Northwest Export Champion, or is the Northwest Export Champion for D.I.T, and has been since 2013. And it's in that guise that we're going to be asking Ian about all things export today. And the title and of the Hands-On Business podcast today is Key Steps to Excelling in Business Globally. So welcome, Ian.
Thank you.
Before we get into the nitty-gritty of the export business, just tell me a bit more about Wheelwash.
Well, you hit the nail on the head. We are an SME. We're based in Cheshire, just over the 3 million turnover mark. So in that niche category that's particularly ideal for exporting, I would say. We're not at the start of our journey, and there's still a long way to go. So we're servicing multinationals, local contractors here in the UK and overseas. And I suppose the best way to describe the product that we have is when you see a truck or a large vehicle leaving construction or a waste or landfill site, you often see some dirty brown tire marks that follow the truck out onto the road. And the equipment that we provide sits at the exit to that site and is cleaning the truck before it leaves. So from a safety aspect, onto the highway, there is no risk of skidding, and the dirt then stays in the site. So again, it's kind of like an environmental and a safety aspect as well.
Okay, that makes sense. And I'm assuming, because that seems like a business where there'd be lots of competitors. Are you a small competitor in that, or are you one of a few?
It is quite a niche market, but as in any industry, over the years, because we've been in business now for just over 30 years, that many competitors are spawned from the origin. So we've had previous employees that have left and set up on their own. And out there in the world, there are pockets of competitors. I could probably name 2 or 3 worldwide competitors that can service the likes of the large clients that you mentioned earlier. But typically in the UK, we're a major player, but there's always the smaller competitors around.
Okay, thank you. Well, I'm going to come back to that competitive landscape and competitive advantage in a minute. But before I go on there, I do want to actually just circle back to that introduction we talked about, that you're a qualified accountant and you're now an MD of a heavy machinery manufacturer. How did that happen? Because that seems like quite a change from being an accountant.
Well, when you throw in the mix that somewhere in the middle, I spent 7 years working in tourism and leisure, that makes it even more complex. I suppose the best way to describe it is I started my career as a traditional accountant working in private practice, but I never enjoyed the compliance and tax side of it quite the same as being out and about with clients. So going out to the client's premises and seeing how things worked on a day-to-day basis was always much more enjoyable. And I suppose that's where I gathered my thirst for business in that context. So I kind of left home, got married and relocated all in one fell swoop. I moved into industry at that time. And that got me into the tourism and leisure industry, which was fantastic and very different. And then I just made the jump just really to be a bigger fish in a smaller pond, because I was working for a big multinational and decided that a new challenge was on the horizon. And that took me into manufacturing.
Okay, so that's an interesting, and I suppose actually, on reflection, maybe I shouldn't be that surprised about it, because in a lot of companies that I've worked with and worked for, a lot of the MDs actually in the UK are originally trained as accountants. Same thing in the PE world. There seem to be lots and lots of accountants, which makes sense. So is that something that's the same in other countries, or is that particularly peculiar to the UK, the fact that MDs or lots of MDs are accountants or previously accountants?
In my experience, I tend to find that it's of two strains. It's either a sales and marketing led MD or a finance led MD. And from what I've seen around the world and clients that we've dealt with, I would say it rings pretty similar on that basis.
Okay. So it's not just a UK-based thing, which I'm going to talk about, the perceptions of others British abroad, especially topical at this particular time. But before I go on there, I mean, in the intro, I said that 20% of your business is outside of the UK. And is that something that was by design, or it just happened like that? Was that a process that you decided, yeah, we need to go international?
Very much so. Back in, I think it was 2008, I took the decision that for the long-term future of the business, we needed to expand our borders. And I decided, I looked into D.I.T, or UKTI as it was back in those days. And I did a 3-day passport to export course, as it was called then, which was, it's like an introduction. It was a small fee. And it's all about the different aspects of trading internationally, pitfalls, and sort of help and guidance. And from there, I left there thinking, right, I'm going to conquer the world from here, and I'm going to start with France. France was the perfect one because it was the nearest neighbour. It had a similar geography and climate, and had similar client base, such as construction and landfill. And I couldn't believe how wrong I was, because it took almost 10 years to go all around the world to only now starting to have some traction in France. It was just a very, very strange thing that I thought that's got to be the place. And I was very wrong. It's
a very interesting situation, because I think lots of people have exactly the same thought process in terms of, well, it's across the channel, it's really close, same sort of, you said, landmass, population, not that dissimilar. Oh, it's got to be a slam dunk. So what were the key things that you saw when you got into France that made it more difficult than you'd first anticipated?
Well, I underestimated the language impact. And perhaps that there's a perception, it's just starting to change now, of UK businesses that, oh, everybody speaks English, so I'll just march on into this new country and use my existing language and it'll be fine. So I was a little naive on the language front, but also I perhaps didn't appreciate how the French did business, how they wanted to be more involved, and even to the extent of having a French manufacturing component part, just to feel that there's that little bit more French about the product.
And you think that the how can I put this politically correctly, that the French attitude to the British had anything to do with that, or was it purely just that cultural element and an understanding of their business methodology and practice?
I think it was just a natural cultural element on their part. It was not malicious or restrictive against the British at all. There was no patriotism and revenge tactics from previous historical events or anything. No, there was none of that. No.
And is there a sort of like perception of British businesses abroad that pervades a lot of different markets, which may challenge British people getting out into those international markets?
Yes, absolutely. There are some nations who very much admire the way the British do business and try to emulate that. But there are other nations who perhaps are more arrogant because that's their general nature, and it's not a bad thing, but they don't accept the British way quite as easily as others. Without singling out specific countries, I know there have been instances where I've been surprised by some of the behaviours of people I'm dealing with. And there was one instance where I was having a meeting with it was a South American colleague, and his wife was coming along, and he was determined that they were going to turn up on time. And he actually told his wife, "We've got to turn up on time. These guys are British. They work to the clock." There are certain perceptions out there that, we have this stereotype about us, just like we probably have stereotype ideas about the French or the Germans, etc. And it was quite funny to hear that.
Yeah, no, and it is interesting, because I think everybody has stereotypes. Because I obviously I've worked quite a lot internationally as well, and I think when you go into a country, you have a view of the way those people are going to be, which is probably one of the worst things you can do. Actually, I think that actually finding out about them from them and from being in the market is much more effective than thinking, "Oh, I'm going to Japan, so I need to behave like this because this is what everyone's told me Japan's like." And I think that then leads to you having to relearn the way you should do business in that country, which can take a bit of time. So that's and do you think those attitudes have changed since you went in? When you started your international journey to now, are those British or the views of British people still the same, or have they changed?
I think they've changed, but partly because of, and it does depend on the sector. But I know we used to deal with a lot of, say, mining companies, and they had a lot of expat contingents working for them, so be that Australian, American, or British. So you were often dealing with somebody that definitely spoke the same language, but often had the same sort of Western values in terms of lifestyle and business. But that's changing more as the population around the world moves around. You could quite easily be speaking to a German who's working for an Italian company in Spain. And therefore, that removes the stereotyping and the preconceptions about a person, and it's then down to the individual characteristics rather than the nation or the flag that they're flying. Yes, I suppose there's always going to be an element of where is this person coming from and what company are they representing. But I would say, going back to your previous question, that there's a huge trust and not so much respect, but trust definitely. I found when going into another country that there's been never a question about, this chap's coming from England. He's definitely a bit dodgy. I've never found that at all, which is a nice feeling to have, because I'm sure other nations don't get the same reception.
No, but I think that's definitely right. And even we probably have preconceived views of, I won't mention the countries, but countries coming to do business here, or when we're going to those countries and thinking, is it going to be safe? Firstly, are they going to cheat me, etc., etc. And actually, what I've tended to find is whatever the cultural or our cultural view of a country is, you have good people and bad people in every country. And I think that's probably one of the key learnings that I've had as I've gone internationally, that you need to just look at the people you're dealing with rather than saying, "Oh, well, this is X country and they're going to behave like this," because nobody works or behaves in a homogenous mass. So I mean, obviously you've been successful both in the UK and obviously you've exported and you've gone internationally. So is there any difference you would say or point to between doing business successfully in the UK and then is there anything different that then leads to success internationally?
It's a very good question. I think you have to tread more carefully internationally to start with until you find your feet. We've now adopted the policy of we try to treat people exactly the same. So we sell the same product in the same way to the same people, whether you're in Birmingham or Bermuda. And that has helped, because what we found is that the client in Bermuda might want something completely different to the one in Birmingham. But what it does is it helps us sell to the opposite one, in that this person over here may wish for one particular feature, and we then think, actually, that might be useful for something in the other. So there is a difference to trade. You do have to make adaptations for language, the way you sell. You can't go in all guns blazing into some countries. And there is that. What point do you bring up price? Because price is always a tricky one. But then again, it is in this country. And I go back to my earlier point about the people from all sorts of nations. We've now found that a lot of our UK business is dealing with international people that represent that UK business.
Yeah, no, and I was just thinking about it. So in terms of, because you mentioned the price, and I said I'll come back to that, which I will. So apart from price, how much do you bespoke what you do depending on the market? Because that's one of the things you just mentioned there, is that obviously different markets want different things. And that's always a challenge that I think businesses have when they are trying to go international, because the Japanese market wants something completely different to the US market, which wants something completely to what you currently make for the UK market. How do you balance that?
Well, we definitely don't adopt the Henry Ford policy of any colour as long as it's black. We don't adopt that one. We always sell we sell to you. We understand what your requirements are and sell and adapt the product accordingly. We're not suddenly going to change it completely and bespoke everything for you unless you wish to pay for it. But we do definitely say, right, okay, so what are the electrics in your country? What are the logistic challenges that we've got? Are the vehicles the same that are going to be driving over it? So there's all of those aspects on the technical side that we have to change. But we definitely just still continue with our solutions-based approach.
And in terms of your competitors, because you alluded to that earlier, that obviously people have started to come into the market probably after you've set the market. So do they do the same thing? How do you differentiate yourself from those competitors? Because lots of times when you are the forerunner, people then just come in and replicate and then do it cheaper.
We try to sell based on the product and its features. It's a very good analogy that I use all the time, that we compare to the motor industry. So we class ourselves as perhaps the Mercedes, BMW of the world. And yes, there will always be the cheaper brands around, perhaps like Vauxhall. And it's understanding what that client wants in the first place. If we end up trying to cater for everybody, we'll do them all badly. We'll end up skimming across all of them. So it's understanding and being upfront with clients. Say, look, we're not the cheapest. You don't shy away from that fact. We're not the cheapest, but we'll try to answer your problem and make sure that you get value for money on more of a longer term project, rather than just a buy now and buy it cheap, but then regret it in perhaps 2 years.
If you were to speak to your younger self about going into some of these markets, and you've got a competitive environment, as you said, some of those companies have followed you in. What would you say if you go into a market such as, I'll just pick a market like South America, and there's a competitor in there, they're cheaper than you, and the customer said, this is the budget we have. What would your advice to that person be?
I would definitely go back to my financial roots and get some data behind that and understand, is that the right market for me in the first place to go to? Just because my competitor's there, yes, it could mean that there's a market being created, but is that the right one? So that's the first part. The second part to that is I would need to understand the costs and margins of my product and know what my limits are and be quite firm with that, so that I'm not going into that market with the sheer excitement of winning my first overseas business contract, coming away thinking, actually, I made a loss on that, which sometimes is necessary to open up a market, but you've got to be open-eyed to it all.
Yeah, and that's a good point, because I'm always speaking to people about price versus value, because lots of salespeople seem very keen to give away margin. Well, actually, I won't even say margin, price, because lots of salespeople don't understand margin and just looking at the revenue figure. So what's your view on that sort of price versus value? How do you balance those two things to make sure that you win enough business, but you're not obviously also just dropping your price every time someone says, oh, well, we can get it cheaper?
We've always had the philosophy there's got to be a reason to discount. And is that reason because you're investing for the long term in that market, or are you investing long term in that client? If you suddenly appear as the almost desperate that you've got to win that business because there's a competitor there, that's a risky strategy, because your credibility then goes.
Yeah, no.
We try to look at things and say, well, okay, if the customer is pushing on price, then it becomes a technical discussion and perhaps encourage them to lose certain features of their product, and so that they end up with maybe a stripped back version, but still a high quality version. Okay,
so that's about inventory, really, isn't it? It's about you're not really dropping your price. You're just changing the offering that you're giving them, and you're giving them that at a lower price, rather than saying, well, this one's 50 grand. All right, we'll now give it you for 35 grand. You're basically saying, well, that's 50 grand. That's still 50 grand. But if you want a 35 grand version, you don't have this feature, you don't have that nuance to it, and therefore we can then still meet your expectations at a lower price.
Or alternatively, offer them a different product in the range. But yes, any business will have, apart from the likes of Apple, will have the instance where discounting is necessary. And as I said, for the client, for the market, for the long term.
Yeah, no, that's good. And have you got any examples of where it's got to a point where you just said, actually, I'm going to walk away from that business, even though on the face of it, that business looks like it's very lucrative, and people are thinking, why is he walking away from that?
Yes, because we've ended up so far from where we originally started that if I flipped it the other way, I'd be saying, well, hang on a minute. If you wanted to charge me so much in the beginning, then you would have made a huge profit. So you were fleecing me. And now you're prepared to give me such a low price. So something's wrong somewhere. So your credit, and that's what I say, your credibility goes. So we have had the instance that, yes, we've walked away where, particularly where we've been against either Chinese or Indian competition, where the price has just been just ridiculous. Well, we can't even build it for the price it's being sold at.
And have you got any examples like that? I definitely want to stereotype Indian and Chinese manufacturing, because actually there's some very good manufacturers in those areas. So have you ever had the issue where someone's gone with a competitor because it's a lot cheaper, but then they've come back to you in the end because actually they've realised that the quality of what you're offering was better and was worth the value that you were charging?
Yes, we have. Yes, but currently we have one in process in that situation, but there have been previous examples where they've had competitor systems and then they go out to tender again and don't include that competitor in the tender list.
Yeah, and it's interesting because obviously that's a longer term view, isn't it? Because obviously you then have to wait for that tender process to come back. But I always find, and when I'm speaking to exporters and people just in business generally, if you believe you've got a quality product, I think you need to stand behind that quality product, because I think, as you said, if you believe you've got a quality product and you start dropping the price, you do start to lose credibility. People don't see it as the same quality as you believe it is, because they think, well, if they can match the Chinese price, it obviously can't be that much better. So I think it is a very slippery slope when people are not really looking at the long term and just thinking, well, actually, I can get a sale here. And a sale is better than no sale. It's not always the case.
Well, I use my car analogy on that one. BMW are not going chasing a Vauxhall Corsa client in the first instance. That's not their primary target. So why would it be? Again, they would cheapen their brand by doing so.
And that's a really, really good example, actually, because I remember, I don't know if they still do it, because I've not had a BMW company car for a very long time, but I remember probably about 20 years ago, and I was looking for a company car, and I went to BMW and I was telling them, oh yeah, but we have a fleet of BMWs, and they said, we don't even discount on fleets. We're not, because we don't need to discount, because people want a BMW, they pay for a BMW. If you want something else, go somewhere else. And that was really probably one of my first introductions to, so actually if you build your brand in the right way, similar to, as you said, with Apple, and people actually believe, rightly or wrongly, that the value they're getting is worth the price they're paying. Actually, they don't generally ask for a discount. They just say, well, that's the price of it, and that's what I want.
I think the interesting thing there, though, is a lot does depend on what the product is. If it's a product of desire, and Apple is the best example, because it's a desirable product. Everybody wants it, and they can sit back and charge the price that they do. Sometimes we have the challenge ourselves that the perception of our product, it's just another health and safety overhead. I'm not paying any more than I need to. Give me your cheapest option. So it becomes an educational exercise, trying to convince them, well, just stop for a moment, think ahead, think of the long term. Or alternatively, if you go off and buy cheap because you have that philosophy of it's just health and safety, then you'll end up coming back.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really key point, and that's where the sales and the marketing and all wrapped up, because education is part of that package. That you can't just go into, as you said, if it's not a product of desire and it's just a product that lots of people will see, well, it's a health and safety product, or it's a healthcare product, and it's just, well, I can get one of a million. It's a longer sales cycle, because they're not actually waking up at night thinking I need this product. but they may well need it to achieve some of their end goals, but they don't see the link. So that's our job, really, or it should be our job, to explain them what the link is and how this is going to benefit them in the long run. So I think that's a really important point, because I think you're right. Lots of people do deceive themselves because they work in that business all the time and they see very clearly the benefit of the product, and they think, oh well, if I go and show that to the customer, they're going to say, oh well, yeah, thank God you've walked through my door. We definitely need that, and we need it at that price. So I think that's a real important one. And I'm just moving on, because we are talking about export, and it would be remiss of me. This is obviously recorded before the Brexit deadline. It'll be released after the Brexit deadline, so I might have to do a little adjunct to see how you've actually dealt with Brexit. But I'm curious to know, what's it all about? How is it affecting your business? Is your business crumbling, or are you prepared and you're ready for whatever our Prime Minister brings?
I'm certainly relieved I'm not selling fruit and veg
yeah.
at this time, or importing fresh produce from the likes of Spain. As far as we're concerned, we've done a lot more business recently in the EU, particularly Sweden, Spain, France, and Belgium. And there's only been the odd conversation with those agents and dealers in reference to Brexit. And it's more of a topical question rather than a concerning question. So we're slightly advantageous that the product that we have is not such a frequent purchase, that it's every day there's a vehicle leaving, and it's not high volume. So that side of things helps, because a capital investment purchase like that is often looked at in more detail, be that a Caterpillar truck coming in from a different country or from a dealership. So it's the border side of it has lessened the impact. I'm more concerned with the transport side of it, really, and the logistics, that if things are taking longer, not just at the transition period around sort of Jan time, but if things are taking longer because of an extra day's transport and checks, then that hike up the price of transport. That will also then impact on the clients that we have, but also it will take longer to get there, and it just might pivot them to say, well, do you know what, I'll find something more local. That's the concern that I perhaps have.
Have you? It's a very difficult one. But have you found any way around that, or is that just something we're gonna have to wait and see how it pans out?
We've started to build a lot more of our rental fleet, in particular in Central Europe. So we have products out there now, and there's always the option of starting a factory within mainland Europe. But we have outlets where we can service the EU quite comfortably without so much the restrictions that we do have right now. But I don't see it as a huge issue, and I'm not trying to be sort of nonchalant about it and dismissive, but I don't see it as a huge issue.
Well, I think it's interesting, because I think lots of people, and it depends on the scale of your business, doesn't it, really? I think because a business like yours that obviously exports to many different parts of the world already has tariffs in different parts of the world, already has different regulations in different parts of the world, which are similar to what obviously will be in the EU if there's a no deal. But they are the same parameters. It's just that we've had frictionless trade with the EU for over 30 years, so it does become, all right, you've got to adapt. But I think a business like yours is probably better set up for that than somebody who actually has only ever worked with the EU, for example, because it's like, well, we've never had to do all this regulation because we've only ever worked with the EU, and it's been seamless. And I think that's probably where some of the businesses that are going to have more significant problems are worried about, because they're not used to doing any of that sort of regulatory or tariff-based trade. So yeah, I get that. Actually, it makes a lot of sense. So I'm not going to go on too much about Brexit, because we could be here all day with the Brexit discussions, which change on a daily basis. So I'll move on. The question that I often get, and so I'm going to pose it, is that lots of businesses have a perceived concern when it comes to, well, actually, if I work with a a country outside of the EU or outside of the UK? You know, do they have the same legal frameworks, which obviously they don't? Do they have the same payment sort of terms? So they're very concerned about, well, if I do business there, how am I going to get paid, or will I get paid? What sort of advice would you give to that sort of question, or to those sorts of people?
I would say yes, there is a note of caution there, but look at some of the people you deal with in the UK. There are people. I think you mentioned it earlier. There are bad people and good people in every nation, and we've had our fingers burnt in this country with clients. Overseas, yes, we've had one instance where we had a problem that was probably 10 years ago with Greece. But generally speaking, we use a number of factors. So we look at the country itself. Have we had any experience in that country? We'll look at the international. There's an international direction that gives a ranking of what that country is like for trustworthiness and ease of doing business. So that's a good indicator. You know, if you're dealing with somebody that's down at number 175, well, yes, you now need to do a little bit more due diligence.
Yes.
Somebody once told me that the further you move south, the more risky it becomes. So dealing with the Scandinavians, for example, and the Dutch is very good because they're very, very good on payments. As you move to Spain, Italy, and a little bit further south, maybe the timescales stretch a little longer. So as long as you factor that in, that's fine. But also look at the different payment methods that are available. Letter of credit, a lot of people swear by them. We tend not to use them very much. And we'll look at the company itself. You can get international credit reports on some clients. There is help from D.I.T on the UK export finance, where you can get guarantees on payment. Although I will, a note of caution on that is that it tends to be more suited to larger contracts, maybe $250,000 or above.
Okay.
There's a whole series of measures that you can look at, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the individuals you're dealing with.
Yeah, no, I think that's very sage advice. I think, you know, looking at different payment terms and effectively, as you said, doing your research as you would do if you were doing anything else, wouldn't you? If you're going on holiday, you'd do a bit of research into the resort you're going to. So business, it should be no different. That you shouldn't think, well, actually, if I want to make a lot of money here, and they're basically the partner in that country is the person that's going to determine whether I do or I don't. You'd want to make sure you research the company, research the credit terms, etc. So I think that's really good advice. And you just mentioned there as well about D.I.T, and obviously I know you're an export champion for the Northwest for the D.I.T. So how can the D.I.T help? Because people hear about, and as you said, it was UKTI before, now D.I.T. Lots of people hear about them, but I speak to lots of exporters that don't use them at all. What would your advice to them be on utilising the D.I.T?
Well, firstly, you get yourself an international trade advisor who are individuals, ex-business people who work for the local department for international trade. They'll come out and see you and talk to you and almost coach you through that early stage of exporting. But then use them as a sounding board. You can give them a call and say, hey, can you get any contacts in Singapore? We've just got a new contract there. Can you help me out at all? And you'll be surprised what level of help and knowledge is out there in so many different countries. People just see the embassy as the place to go when you lose your passport on holiday. But there is, I once described it to somebody as you've got, on the top floor, you've got the ambassador. But underneath him or her, there are several floors of commercial people who are flying the British flag and who are there to help you. And we've got some fantastic connections all around the world where you can ring them up and say, look, can you just give these people a nudge? We're struggling to get through to them. And it's like, you know yourself, if you got a call saying, hello, it's the Dutch embassy on the line, are you going to take the call? Well, of course you're going to take the call, because you either think you've been invited to a cocktail party or it's something very serious. So that there's a lot of help out there, and it's building up that connection, those connections and networks of local on the ground knowledge.
Yeah, no, I think it's a very invaluable resource actually, which is underutilized by English businesses trying to move into international markets. I mean, I remember we did some work in Turkey, and the lady there, our consultant, she basically set up all the appointments. She found the distributor. We went around virtually the whole of Turkey, and it's not a small country. We flew into Ankara, out of Ankara, to Istanbul, all over the place, and she was taking us everywhere. And she had lots and lots of connections, and because of that, we're doing business successfully in Turkey. And had we not worked with Merv, we would have had some serious problems trying to get into there. So it was an eye opener to me, actually. I mean, this was now 5 or 6 years ago, but I think similar to me at that time, I didn't really know what the D.I.T did. You see them occasionally on TV and on those sorts of things, but you think, oh yeah, that's not really for me because we're a small business. And I think it is important that whatever size business you are, that you should at least give them a call if you're trying to move into another market and see what they can offer. I think that's really important. Okay, so a more general term, because we talked a lot about export and how to get into business in export, but obviously you've grown a business, part of which is export. So what would you say are the key things which one would consider when you're trying to grow a business and develop it and sustain it?
Definitely have a plan. Whether you call that plan a strategy, a vision, it's the same. You need that longer term plan, which can be then broken down into sections. And that's got to be then supported by a great product and great people that share that vision or understand that vision with you. And in the early days, you need to spend more time getting people on board with that vision. But if they believe in it with you, the power of almost everybody rowing together in that same direction really does make a massive difference. But ultimately, you stand or fall sometimes on your product. Until your product is out there and somebody's tasted it, tested it, experienced it, nobody knows. So your product is key as well.
And how do you ensure that you get a great product? Because not everyone has a great product or the best product when they start, but then they evolve and develop it. How do you make sure that you keep evolving and you make sure that you keep that ahead of the game with your product?
Listen to your customers. They're a great source of information for product development. Sometimes, yes, every customer is an expert and they can suddenly make it twice as good as you for half the price. But they do have a lot of information to share. So listen to your customers, listen to the sales team that speak to those customers, feed that in, and you'd be surprised from what four corners of the business some innovations come from. We ourselves have a product development team, and whilst it's based around a lot of senior people, there's a lot of knowledge that comes into that team from around the business where people are throwing ideas into the hat. And again, that comes back to that great team. If everybody's enthused about it, somebody will say, hey, what about this idea? Or what about that one? And it does. So that's how you keep that product evolving and changing. You don't, when something goes wrong, try to understand why and put a fix in place. And it's not always very quick to do.
Yeah, no, I think that the three things: the plan, the great product, the great people. I think there's lots of management books, there's lots of nuance you can go into, but I think those three are the key things. If you've got great people, they will elevate. Even if you've got a poor product, they'll elevate that product. But if you've got a great product, that's what then leads to success. And I think that what you said about product development is key as well. And I think that because lots of people think product development sits in that little corner over there, and they go into that little room and they come out with these great product innovations, whereas actually, as you rightly said, they can come from anywhere. The sales people can have them, the marketing people can have them, senior people can have them, and yes, you have to have a structure for bringing those out. But yeah, I think some of the best product innovations I've seen have come from just you speaking to a customer, and the customer says something, not even in a direction of trying to get you to do a new product, but you think, oh, I didn't realize that was a problem. Oh, well, we can do something about that. And then all of a sudden you've got a unique product or a unique product feature which separates you from the rest because you're speaking to your customers on a regular basis. We've
actually got products that have developed or evolved based on that exact thing, where a customer had a problem and said, do you know, is there any chance you could have a look at this or do this? And we took a look at it, and from there we've developed a product range. So it does work.
Yeah, no, yeah, it's certainly. I mean, I'm almost obsessive about every member of my team, whether that's whether their official job title is product development or whatever it may be, to get out with customers. Because I think that the more you get with customers, firstly, you get closer to the customer. People, customers like understanding the business that they're doing business with, but also you pick up so many things when you're out speaking to people about products and services and environment. So one more about more specifically about you, and then I'm going to finish off with a couple of last questions. As an MD, and I've seen this a lot, whatever position you are before, you move into that MD position, and then all of a sudden, automatically, people think you've got all the answers. So where do you go for inspiration? Because you don't go from having some of the answers to all the answers overnight. So how do you keep developing and making sure that you do have that vision and a ability to motivate and manage your business?
You're very right. Once you do get into that top tier, people do think there's a lot of information that you know or have the answers to. But similarly, it's also very lonely at times. So in order to keep you and your fire going, you've got to come up with ways. And for me personally, I lean a lot on peer groups, like-minded people of similar businesses of similar size locally, even family and friends. You'd be amazed what comes out of a conversation with a family member that you can then sparks a little something inside. And you think, oh, actually, yeah, that's a good way of approaching that. So there's that, but also thinking time. You mentioned business books. There's keeping yourself up to date with whether it's on LinkedIn, business books, thinking time. For me, down at the gym, it's that thinking time and just taking yourself away from the day-to-day things, and that makes a big difference. So that's how I keep my batteries going.
It's an interesting one, because anytime you listen to any of the I don't know what you call them, business gurus, motivational gurus, they always talk about that thinking time. Because I remember, I can't remember what it's called now, but Anthony Robbins had a set of videos. I think it's called Personal Power. That was it. It's called Personal Power. And I listened to those ages ago, probably about 10, 15 years ago. And he talks about the hour of power, whereby when you get up, you do the hour of power, you do some exercise, you don't speak to anybody, you don't think about work in terms of getting into the nitty-gritty, and you just give yourself the time to reflect on what you're doing and what you're trying to achieve. Now, I must admit, I don't do an hour, but since then, every time I get up, I do some exercise and just let myself relax, similar to what you're saying about the gym, because I think that it does open up some neural pathways you don't get if you just get up and you go straight to work and that you're right into the problem solving. I think actually looking after yourself both mentally and physically, which we mentioned at the beginning, I think helps, especially when you're in high pressure situations, to be able to think rationally and not, I'm not saying you don't suffer from stress, but to help dissipate some of that stress that automatically comes from the pressure that's put onto a managing director. I
think also you've got to be careful that you don't feel you have to be doing something. It's not like about job justification anymore. It's okay to take an hour out in the middle of the day to do that, either thinking time, learning time, because that's part of your job. That don't think, all my colleagues are busy doing operational things, I've got to do something like that. No, your role is very different as MD, and you're thinking about next month, next quarter, next year, 3 years. And to do that, you've got to take yourself out of the day-to-day pinging of emails coming in.
Yeah, and it's interesting because I think that's why not everyone's suited to that level of role, not just because of the competency, because obviously the level of competency as well, but I think just in terms of personality type, because there are lots of people who just love to be busy being busy. And actually, when you say to someone, well, why don't you just go and take some time to reflect? They can't do it. They find it virtually impossible to do it. They just have to be doing something, because otherwise they think, if I'm not doing something operationally, as you described, I'm not doing a good job. And actually, sometimes that hour of thinking time can be worth 5 weeks of operational activity. So I think that's really good advice, that's in terms of the thinking time and the peer groups. And as you said, just speaking to people in your family, because you never know where the good ideas are going to come from. So I've got 2 last questions. The first one would be, what's the biggest mistake you think you've ever made in business?
I'm guessing you want me to admit to one.
Well, yeah, it would be nice.
I would probably say around recruitment. And I wouldn't single out just necessarily one particular recruitment, but generalizing on recruitments that I've made over the years, there are some which, I wish I'd not gone down that route, because once you've got somebody embedded in the business, it's then hard to unpick situations. If it goes wrong, it's very costly, it's time consuming, it has an impact on the culture. And it takes a long time to get things back to how you want them to be. You know, if you buy a commodity and you don't like it, provided you can afford to do it, you can change it the next day. But when it's dealing with people and the influence it has on the business, that makes a massive difference. So I would say that in hindsight, if I could go back and do some of the recruitment decisions again, I would definitely do that.
Well, I think most people would probably concur with that in terms of their biggest mistakes, because they tend to be people mistakes. Because as you said, most other things you can rectify relatively quickly. And I don't think anyone can claim, however good at recruitment they are, I don't think anyone can claim they've not made some monumental recruitment mistakes in the past. And hopefully we learn from them, but we'll probably still make some more in the future. But
there are no Amazon reviews on the people you're recruiting.
I like that. I'm going to steal that, actually, because it's very true. I mean, I do reflect sometimes, actually, on the fact that we're probably lucky because we're an age where, whilst we have histories before we started working, they're not all over the social media field. So you can't find out what we were doing when we were 20 or 23 or 24. Whereas nowadays, I remember recruiting somebody, and she was actually very good. But I remember she was sitting there. She was like a marketing assistant, and she was like and I said, "What are you doing on YouTube?" And she said, "I've got to remove this." And I said, "What is it?" She said, "It's a drinking game, but it's my friend who was in the drinking game. It's on YouTube, but for some reason it's got my name on it. So everybody always thinks that it's me." So she was trying to find a way to take it down. I thought, yeah, I mean, obviously it wasn't you this time, but the whole of their history now is on YouTube or LinkedIn or wherever it is. So yeah, there isn't any Amazon reviews, but if you really want to do some digging, you could probably find out a bit of information, but unfortunately not the sort of information you probably want to find out. All right, and then my very last question is, what do you think is the best decision that you've ever made so far in business?
That's probably a much easier one for me to answer, and without it sounding too cheesy in terms of the topics we're talking about, I would say to enter the export market. That's the best decision, because I can take it on a personal level, that I felt it's really good for me because it's opened my eyes to food which around the world, which I love. It's opened up travel, new friendships and contacts. But on a business level, it's helped develop our products. It's given an additional credibility to the business, strings to our bow in terms of the company names that we've dealt with across the world. And that has meant this kind of longevity of the business. And particularly this year with the year that we've had, that we've not really touched on at all, is spreading your product around the world makes a difference, because not at every location is struggling.
Yeah, that's a very good point, actually. And I suppose I purposely haven't mentioned the big C word because everyone's talking about it, and I wouldn't say I necessarily find it depressing, but it's sometimes nice to have a space where you're talking about positives that have happened in the end. And I think that is one, which is a nice one to end on as well, is that the internationalization of your business spreads the risk to an extent, doesn't it? Because if you're only business within one particular area and it's hit really badly by COVID, you automatically struggle. Whereas if you're in several different locations, as you said, there's different markets which are hit at different rates with COVID, which then allows you to flex your business. And that's not just COVID related, but just in all parameters, whether that's a financial crash or whatever it may be. Having an international footprint is a much more stable business than having it just in one location. Okay, so I think that's a perfect case, perfect place to stop. I want to thank Ian for spending that time, because I know he's taken time out of his busy schedule. I know you'll all have found that very, very illuminating, as I did. And I will put any links that we may have. I don't know what those links will be yet, but we'll have links to the podcast, we'll have links to the audio, the video, and I'll be placing those up. And then I'm sure that if you're in the Northwest area and you're involved in export, you will come in contact with Ian at some point in a variety of his roles. So thank you very much, Ian, for that.
You're welcome.